Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'll begin by saying that I'll be splitting my time with the hard-working, common-sense Conservative member for Fundy Royal. Madam Speaker, it's always an honour to rise in this House to address the House, but unfortunately I do so this evening without optimism and without enthusiasm. Instead, I am forced to rise with disappointment and frustration with the state of this House of Commons. In the past 24 hours, we have seen a tired, weak, and desperate Liberal government use closure and programming motions in order to avoid accountability for their scandals and to attempt to distract Canadians with their temporary 2-month tax trick. Now, Madam Speaker, what's interesting about motion number 43 is that it is a guillotine motion that has itself been guillotined by a guillotine motion. This is a motion that would introduce closure on a motion that is about closure and stopping debate. So here we are this evening debating motion number 43. Now, I'd want to say that this bill was actually written on the back of a cocktail napkin, but I think it's more appropriately it seems that this bill was written on an Etch-a-Sketch, which isn't applicable to this bill. But they've taken it and they've shaken it and they've changed it a few times to try to get the NDP on board, and no one exactly knows what the next shake will do when they shake the Etch-a-Sketch once again. But the Leader of the Liberal government in the House of Commons has shut down debate on not one, but 2 matters of privilege today so they can force through their temporary, short-sighted tax trick legislation. But the problem is, Madam Speaker, is that the Liberals are afraid of the Canadian people. They know that their parliamentary calendar is slipping away and that their days that they have left bringing legislation before this House of Commons are limited. And they know that a strong, common-sense Conservative government is on the horizon. And after a common-sense Conservative Party takes power after a carbon tax election, we will be able to deliver for the hard-working Canadians that we have the honour of representing. But, Madam Speaker, we know that the Liberal government has allowed their entire legislative agenda to be paralysed. And why is this House paralysed from all other pieces of legislation? It's because they violated an order of the House of Commons. They violated the order of the House on June 10th, wherein they were required to table documents with this House, with the clerk, so they could be turned over to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Which begs the question, what is so damning in those documents that the Liberals would shut down Parliament for 2 months to prevent the Mounties from getting those documents? So what does this programming motion here today actually do? Well, first of all, it shuts down debate on this piece of legislation. In this House, there are 338 seats. Yet the honourable members who sit in those seats will be prevented, all but 5, from debating this piece of legislation. Billions of dollars will not be debated in this House because of this programming motion. Even more egregious, this Liberal programming motion means that this temporary tax trick bill will skip altogether the committee process, meaning that it will not go to the Finance Committee to hear from experts. It will not go to the Finance Committee to hear from Canadians who will be affected. It will not go to the Finance Committee to hear from small businesses and small business workers who will be affected. There will not be an opportunity to make amendments to this piece of legislation. And what's more, no sensible legislative body ought to agree to this process outside of an emergency situation. But, Madam Speaker, let's be clear. Plummeting Liberal poll numbers may seem like an emergency to this Liberal government, but it's not an emergency for the Canadian people that we have the great honour of representing. And if you read this programming motion, this guillotine motion, it has the wording be deemed requested, be deemed referred, be deemed considered, be deemed reported, be deemed concurred, be deemed read a third time and passed. It is as lazy as it is reckless. This programming motion is not democratic, and in fact, it is an affront to transparency and to Canadian democracy. So why is the Liberal government doing this? Why would they bring forward this temporary tax trick at this time? Because it's a distraction. It's a distraction from the other scandals that they are involved in. It's a distraction from the ArriveCan scandal, where two guys in a basement were paid millions of dollars for no actual IT work. It's a distraction from the $400 million Liberal Green Slush Fund, which is currently also under consideration in this House as a matter of privilege. It's a distraction from the ever-evolving scandal around the disgraced former Minister of Employment, the member for Edmonton Centre, who falsely claimed Indigenous status in order to gain contracts from this Liberal government, which has also led to its own question of privilege. This conduct, the ethical lapses of this Liberal government are outright disgraceful. And finally, last week, after weeks of opposition members demanding action, the member from Edmonton Centre finally stepped down as a member of the Liberal cabinet. But Madam Speaker, I can assure you that the good people of Edmonton Centre are watching, and I know that after the next election they will remove him as the Member of Parliament for that riding, so that common sense Conservative member can represent those fine people. But what happened right after that member quit from Cabinet? Well, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister obviously took to Google and typed in, ways to distract Canadians. They came up with this new temporary tax trick. He may have been, Googling it at the Taylor Swift concert as he kept changing different ways of doing that. But Canadians don't just see this as bad vibes, as might be noted. Canadians see this as a real challenge for going forward and for their livelihoods. And, Madam Speaker, I talk regularly, as I know many colleagues on this side of the House do, with local constituents and local small business owners. The small business owners who may have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 employees and who put in the long hours themselves late into the night. They're up early in the morning before the sun rises in order to build a business for themselves, for their families, and for their communities. And when I'm speaking with local businesses over the last few days, they have real concerns about the impact this temporary tax trick will have on their businesses, on their point of sale and their computer systems, where they will have to shoulder the costs of updating those systems for December 14th, and then again, updating again on February 15th, which incidentally is Flag Day in Canada, and they are going to have to bear those costs. They're also concerned about the potential for audits down the way, for incorrectly, out of no fault of their own, incorrectly applying these new rules. And what's more, Madam Speaker, because this falls over the new year, this is 2 fiscal years for most businesses, so they have the double challenge of being audited twice for the challenges of this program. I've received a number of emails. I want to quote one email that I did receive, and this small business owner wrote this: "The federal government does nothing but expects us to eat the cost of trying to make the federal government look good, of which we then must do more work to turn all of this off in February. Sorry if I'm not very supportive of this very badly thought out policy." That's a small business owner who's expressing the concerns that so many of us have heard about how this program was brought about. And let's talk again about the temporary nature of this program. So it goes until February 15th. And what happens about 6 weeks after that? Well, first, the escalator tax on wine, beer, and spirits goes up automatically, and even worse, on its way to quadrupling the carbon tax on April 1st, we will once again see the carbon tax raise on the way to costing 61 cents per litre. Madam Speaker, this is simply unacceptable. Madam Speaker, this is a poorly thought out policy. We should not have been at this point in the Parliament where the Liberals are so desperate to implement a temporary tax trick to try to distract Canadians from the poor record that they have as a government. They have made this House unworkable. Madam Speaker, this is not the policy that we should be going forward. We should be having a carbon tax election so that Canadians can make the decision that they want to see with a strong, common-sense Conservative government after the next election. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, really and truly, Conservatives just don't have any shame. Think about what it is that they're actually saying that they're collectively voting against. You know, they campaigned saying that they believe in a GST holiday. They literally campaigned on that. Their former leader not only tweeted it, but their current leader retweeted it. And it was a wonderful, beautiful idea when they campaigned on it, and they made a promise to do what it is that we're actually doing. We're actually fulfilling one of their commitments that they made a couple of years ago, Madam Speaker. It doesn't make sense. Now they're voting against it. I don't know how it is members of the Conservative Party can actually justify breaking a promise that they made to Canadians that we're actually putting into place, let alone the fact, Madam Speaker, that they're telling their constituents, sorry, we got to listen to our leader because our leader has told us we have to vote against it. And that's the real reason why, Madam Speaker. My question to the member is, does he really believe that Aaron O'Toole and his campaign platform was absolutely worthless? Is that what we can anticipate at the next election?
The honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm very proud to stand up on behalf of the people I serve, the great people of Perth Wellington. And what the people of Perth Wellington and people across the country are demanding is a carbon tax election. They want the ability to have a say on where the carbon tax goes. On this side, we will oppose the carbon tax. And that's the comparison. On the Liberal side, they're offering a temporary 2-month tax trick on certain items, but on this side, we are offering the permanent cancellation of the carbon tax for all Canadians across the board. And we're also saying that we should take the GST off of new home construction under $1 million so that we can see the spurring of up to 30,000 new homes being built each and every year. The people I talk to who are having trouble and challenges finding a place to live that's in their price range will be benefited from that, and it will spur growth in our communities, be helpful for the economy, and make sure that the cost of living goes down for Canadians.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Madam Speaker. If we remove GST on dinner for 4 at a restaurant, and let's just say 4 people can dine for $100 plus taxes, so that's about 5% GST and 10% HST in Quebec. So you have the 15% tax, and then you have to tip on that dinner. You would save $5. That's how much the GST would amount to. Would that really help the average Canadian family all that much? The average Canadian family who might want to go to the restaurant? Would it really help them that much, or is this just a smoke and mirrors type initiative?
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the member for Beauport-Limoilou for her question. In my riding, and in many of my colleagues' ridings, we know people, families who have to go to food banks. There are more and more Canadians who need to visit food banks. They are not going out to restaurants. They cannot eat at restaurants because they have to go to food banks. This bill will not at all help those families who have to go to food banks. They do not have money to spend to help their families. And why? Because this Prime Minister and this Liberal government made our economy worse, and everything is more expensive for Canadians. This bill will not help the vast majority of Canadians.
For London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. During the last Harper government, which was a majority government, of course, Stephen Harper allocated over 100 government bills. So I would imagine that it's hard for Canadians to believe that this current Conservative Party is so upset about the fact that there is a time allocation here, considering that record. So I would like to ask the member, considering that record, would the member agree that time allocation on over 100 bills is deeply undemocratic?
The honourable member for Perth Wellington. 5 seconds.
Madam Speaker, what's deeply undemocratic is a Liberal government who campaign on not using it and then hypocritically using it so often, allowing only hours of debate. In this case, an hour and 15-minute debate on a major tax policy measure that will not have any debate in this House, no debate in committee, no room for amendments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.